Hello everyone. In this lecture, I will discuss the steps to bind the role to a user or service account. So we know that role binding is used to associate a role with a user, group or service account within a specific namespace. Without a role binding, the role itself doesn't grant any access. So this is what you have to keep in mind. So let's understand each section of this role binding YML file. So it started with API version. So it specified the RBAC API version, and basically it is used to define the role binding. So for defining a role binding, the API version is same. The next is kind. So here you have to use role binding. So it declares that this object is a role binding, meaning it binds a role to a user, group or service account within a namespace. Metadata. In the metadata, you have to define the name of this role binding as well as the namespace. The next is subject. Subject means who get the permissions. So here under this kind, you can define the user, or if it is a service account, you can type service account, and then in the name you can define the name of the user or service account, and make sure to use the appropriate API group. So here you have to use rbac.authorization.k8s.io. So this is the API group managing the authentication. And one important thing I want to tell you here, which I already discussed in the previous lecture, that Kubernetes doesn't manage user authentication itself. It relies on an external authentication system like certificate-based authentication or AWS IAM or Active Directory. So for our environment, I'm going to use service account. So Kubernetes allowing us to create a service account. So this is one of the benefit, right? So if you want to access your Kubernetes cluster via the API, then you can use service account. Now the next important is role ref. So which role is being bound? Here you have to define the name of the role. So first is kind. Under kind, you simply define the role and name. In the name, you have to define the role that you have already created. So we have created a role with the name of pod-reader, and finally you have to give the name, that is API group. So the API group manages the RBAC. So when you are going to execute or apply this role binding, what will happen? The user or service account will have the access to the Kubernetes cluster via the API. So that's all. We'll see you in the next lecture.